Hi guys, welcome to our meetup, Elegant Solutions for Common Problems in Selenium. My name is Yair from Rain the Dog. We are a company that specializes in providing automation solutions. We'll talk about the company in a second. And you are watching an English translation of a meetup that occurred lately in Hebrew. Our company was founded in 2018. And our main goal is to provide the best automation solutions out there. We're specialized in building automation infrastructure from scratch, also with training to your employees and giving various automation solutions in both mobile and web applications. This meetup is brought to you with the collaboration of Test.il. This meetup will be held in Python. By the way, we also specialize in Java and C#, but we've decided to give all these examples of this meetup using Python. In this meetup, we will provide answers to questions that were brought to you by the community under Test.il team in Facebook. We will provide answers to 4 questions that you guys brought up. Each question will be up to 15 minutes. The first question will deal with endless loading page. The second one will deal with a wait for a fully loaded page. The third one will deal with download bar that is over an element or other bars that might also cover an element. The fourth and last one will click on a non-interactable element. And in the last part, we'll keep up for another additional questions and some other information that we'll provide. So let's head over to our first example. It will be the endless loading page. What does it mean, an endless loading page? Sometimes when we navigate to a web page, it takes too long to load, we might be able to perform an action while not having to wait for it to complete. For example, when you have a script running or a large photo that is loading or something is wrong with a web page. In those examples, it might take a long time to load. Sometimes it might be an infinite time and we won't be able to perform any test. Currently, our test is navigating to this page. I'm running it, by the way. Yes, I made a mistake and I need to run it with PyTest. I'll rerun it now. Now the test is running. As you can see, here on the top of the page next to loading HTML, it's still loading. While the page is loading, I'm able to click the gray and white buttons which will change the background. So it means that even though the web page is still loading, I'm able to perform actions on the web page. If I'm heading back to the PyCharm, you can see that test is still running. It's still running while I'm able to perform actions, which means that even though this page will take a long time to load, even might take an infinite time to load, we can still perform actions on the web page. So the motivation of stopping the web page might be that in this particular case, we might just want to click the gray button and validate that the background is gray. And we are not testing the loading of the page. The loading of the page might be another test. For now, I'm just testing the button that changes the background to gray. The suggested solution for our web page will be first to change the page load strategy. We can choose between eager, none, and the default is normal. Then we will click on the required element and we're not bound anymore to waiting for the full page load that might never occur. About the page loading strategy, this allows us to alter the basic Selenium strategy. The basic Selenium strategy will wait for the page to load. It might take an infinite time, it might throw a timeout after a while, but we don't want to do that. We just want to change it to something that will enable us to interact with some elements. Let's open the console and run some JavaScript so I will be able to demonstrate to you guys what do I mean. If I'll type the document dot ready state, I will get complete because now the web page is loaded. Already loaded, nothing is still on a state of loading. But if I'm refreshing it, as you can see, the page now, the document ready state is interactive. When the web page is interactive, I can still press the gray button. Okay, so if I'll press the gray button, the background will change to gray, and if I'll press the white button, it will change to white. Let's look at our code. First, we need to identify the element that we want to click on. So let's head over to our browser, and we'll inspect the element. As you can see here, the button has an ID. It's called background gray. We'll just copy it to our test. So now we're dealing with a web element, which we'll call it gray button. Oh, I forgot one thing really important. I need to set the page load strategy before initializing the WebDriver. So we'll use the desired capabilities, which enable us to give some other capabilities to our WebDriver. We'll deal with Chrome, of course. And these capabilities is just like an array of parameters, like a map, that I can give it a key and a value. In this case, the key is the page load strategy, and the value inside of this key would be eager. Eager means that the only waiting that the Selenium will perform on the web page will be until JavaScript document ready state will give interactive result. Now I'm just providing the desired capabilities to my WebDriver, and we can continue with identifying the button. So we'll do the driver find element by ID, and then I can give it the gray button ID that I found on the web page. Then I can just click on it. Now I can just run the test and to see what happens. Now the page is loading, and you can see that already the background is gray. So it means that while the page is loading, we were able to press the gray button. And also, as you can see, the execution is already completed. Now we can complete the test. We'll start by getting the background color of the body. Because we just click the button, we want to make sure that our test does test something. So we'll find the element of the body, then we can get the attribute of the body, which will be the background color. Yeah, I'm getting the value of the CSS property and the background color. The next step is to provide the expected value. This is the hexadecimal value of the color gray. Now the thing is, the element value of CSS property will give me only the RGB value. So I also need to make some modification. I need to alter the value instead of RGB to be hexadecimal. That's why I'm calling it body element color after click. Now, the only thing I need to do is to get the actual value, which will be the hexadecimal value of the body element color after click. Let's just copy that. And now we can say dot hex. That's it. Now we can add the assertion, which would be the expected value and the actual value. We need to make sure they are equal. And we can give an error message in case something would fail. In this case, we will say color didn't match. We can give any kind of an error message. So now our test is completed. Now we can overview the test. What we did, we changed the page load strategy to be eager. Now the page can just load. We press the button, then we got the body element and then the color of the body element, and then we just executed the test. We also added the assertion to make sure that the test is doing whatever what was intended. Now let's execute the test. As you can see, the page is still loading, but the background was already changed to gray. So it means that we pressed the button. And also we see this green V. So it means that the test passed. The assertion didn't fail us. So our test is just doing whatever it was intended to do. Here you can see that I just missed the slide for the playtime, so you can enjoy it now. And we'll just wait for a minute for some additional questions. And if we won't have any, we'll just move on to the next question. Now we'll head to the second question. Wait for a fully loaded page. The problem that we're facing here is, as opposed to the previous problem, now the page is loaded, but there are still elements that are loading. This especially happens when there are asynchronous functions, such as JavaScript functions, loaders, API calls, and etc. Another example is whenever you surf Netflix, for example, sometimes you don't see the whole list. Sometimes the list is still loading, and sometimes whenever you log in and out from the app, you'll see different lists. This means that the app was already loaded, even the web app, and there is something in the background like an API call that is still downloading more posters of your series and movies and stuff like that. The offered solution here will identify which are those elements. Are there the API calls, the online content, the loaders? We also implement a method that we have developed that we call it wait for element to vanish. So we'll wait for this loader to vanish, and then we can start implementing our test and interact with other elements. So let's start see the solution. Now we can start run the example. First we'll just try and run it, and then we'll discuss it. As you can see now, there is a loader on the screen. After a few seconds, the loader disappears, and then we can start interacting with other elements such as the Rain the Dog logo. If we look at the error message, we can see that the element is not interactable. So the logo that we try to identify and click, it was identified, but the loader was over the top of this element. So we weren't able to click on it. If we'll inspect the element, we can see that the element has a class name of a logo. We'll identify it by the class name, but for now we'll just delete the click because we need to deal with the loader. Let's try to identify the loader. We'll refresh the screen. And you can see here that the loader has an ID of a loader. We'll copy this ID and we'll find the element. We'll find element by ID, of course. Now that we have the loader, the only thing we need to do is to head over to the wait for element to vanish method and wait for it to vanish. Okay, now we can see our method, the wait for element to vanish. And what do we mean by that? Let's write down the method and then we can have a look. By the way, this is a predefined method and I will break into it in a second. Here you can see that the method is given as a param, the web element. Then we can ask if the element is displayed. Then we start a timer. By the way, here you can see like a 5 seconds of interval time. It might be better to give it as a parameter to the method, but for this demo purposes it's hard-coded. And then we ask, is the element displayed? And of course, if it's still not in a timeout, so we'll continue to ask, is it displayed? Is it displayed? And in the end, we'll return the value if it was not displayed. Why not? Because we want it to be vanished. If it was still displayed after our interval, it means that the element didn't vanish. That's why we return the not displayed in line 68. Now we can return to our test. Here we can initialize a Boolean value of the method that we just have a look. And if the loader was still present, we can throw an error message for that. So we'll say, is the loader vanished? If it was not vanished, we'll throw this error message. Now we can try and click on it. We'll run this test for now to see if everything is working correctly, and then we can complete all the other steps. Okay, as you can see, the loader is still present and we expect to click on the logo. Nothing happens, and unfortunately our test was failed. Let's have a look on the fail reason. It says element is not interactable, and as you can see, it's not interactable in line 45. Okay, you see this grayed out loader element. It means that we don't use it. I accidentally sent as a parameter to the wait for element to vanish the logo element and not the loader element. So now after we fixed it, let's rerun the test. As you can see now, we clicked on the logo and we have a new tab. Whenever you click on the logo, it opens a new tab of the website of Rain the Dog. So it means that our test has passed successfully, and now we can start completing it. In order to complete the test, I will use another predefined method which will called switch to new tab. This method argument is optional. We won't use it in this example. So the thing is that we're going to switch to the last opened tab. You see the window handles max size -1. So this method will switch to the new tab that was opened because it was expected by our test. And we have the current URL, and we can assert the expected URL, which is the original URL that we had in the beginning of the test, and we can compare them. If the current URL and the expected URL after that we switch to a new tab didn't match, we can throw this error message. Okay, we will rerun the test. We have a new tab, we switch to this new tab, and hopefully we also compared the two URLs. As you can see here, the test passed. It means that line 48 didn't fail on assertion. Okay, there is a question in the chat. You don't see the chat on screen, but I can tell you that someone is asking why not use the return document ready state that we saw in the previous example. This question was brought up by Oren. Okay. Let's try to understand why. In this case, we had the loader, and the loader was the page was already loaded. So it doesn't mean that we can still use the document ready state, because the document ready state as if the web page is still loading. In this case, we had like a asynchronous function that is still being loaded even though the DOM was already loaded. Oren said that he meant something else, that to use the JavaScript executor. He probably meant to use the driver.execute script. Here you can write down whatever JavaScript that you want to run, especially this document.ready state. Okay, let me give you an example. We can see here in the console, if we write down document.ready state, we can see that the web page is completed. Here it's still complete, even though that the web page wasn't fully loaded. Maybe Oren was referring to the previous example. Okay, yeah, in the previous example, we had this problem. That's why we changed the browser page load strategy to be eager, which interactive was enough for that. In this case, okay, so let's make it straight. In this example, the document ready state doesn't help us a lot. In the previous demonstration, we changed the page load strategy. That's why we could use that. Okay, let's have a look on this website. I like to use this website because it takes a lot of time to load it. Now it was already loaded, but if you see now the page is completed. Now it's still loading, it's interactive, and I can still click on some of the nav menu. Why should I do that? If you work in a company and that you have a very busy and slowly loading website, it doesn't mean that you can test other aspects of the web page. It means that yes, you need to tell your dev team to fix it, but you can still interact with the web page, and still other tests can be performed even though the web page is not being loaded or it takes too much time to load it. Okay, this question will be: the downloads bar is over an element. How can we explain that? Okay, sometimes we have an external element which is not a Selenium element that might cover the element that we want to interact with. In this case, we need to think about different solutions in order to interact with this particular element. Let's have a look of what I'm talking about. Here you can see the bar. The Chrome is being controlled by an automated test software. Let's assume that we have an element that is underneath this bar, but we cannot click on it unless we'll click on the X button, and we'll remove this bar. So there are several ways to tackle this problem. The first one, we can use a flag. If we would use a flag such as the exclude switches flag, we might be able to remove the enable automation bar, so it won't be there from the first place. That's the first option. Another option is to use an external tool such as AutoIt. AutoIt for Windows is an external tool that you can use to interact with elements of the operating system. A third option is to use an action chain. Action chain is something that we would use in this demo. What can we do? For example, we can identify the element that we want to interact with, and then we can move to it, just to scroll to it as a real user would do. This is the solution that we'll see in a second. The fourth and the final solution is just to ignore it. Sometimes we might be able to click on an element even though it's hidden or it's not on the screen and we need to scroll to it. So I don't prefer the fourth option, even though it might work sometimes, because it won't imitate a real user. And when you don't imitate a real user, sometimes you can do some actions with Selenium that a real user cannot do, and you cannot expose some bugs that you might have. Now let's overview our test. As you can see, for now, the test steps is just a copy paste of different like previous steps that we've seen in the test before. Of course, those steps should be in a fixture that we can use using PyTest, but just for the simplicity of these examples, I copied paste them. We don't encourage you to copy paste stuff. Try to reuse your code as much as you can. Now we can add a next step. Let's go back to the website and let's identify this 100 gigs. Okay, here I try to click and to show you the bar, but I had my, okay, now we can see the bar. I canceled the click. Okay, let's identify and run it, and then we'll see it happening with the automation code. As you can see here, those two buttons are a tag with href, And the only difference between the two is that we have the attribute of the download. On the first one it's 100 MB and on the second one is 1 GB. So we can use that to build a CSS selector to identify the element that we want to interact with. Let's go back to the code. We'll call it download button small. Why small? Because it's the smaller amount to download. This is the 100 megabytes. So we'll find the element by CSS selector. We'll build it. Because it's an A tag, we can use A as the main tag. And then we can say, look for an attribute which is called download, and the value of this attribute should be 100 MB. That way we can identify this element. Okay. After we identified it, we can click on it. Let's run the test to see if everything is working properly. Okay, as you can see, we clicked on the 100 megabytes button. Now we can see this download bar, and we can see that the 1 gigabyte button is hidden. What can we do now? Let's try to identify in a very similar way the larger button, which could be using the A tag, download as attribute, and now it will be 1 GB, 1 gigabyte. See, that's the one. Now, in order to do it properly, we'll use action chains. Why do we use action chains? Because let's say that the user, a real user, wanted to click this large button. After this user clicked on the smaller button and now the download bar is hiding the element, this user will just scroll down until the 1 gigabyte button will be visible. We'll use the action chains, we'll move to this element, we'll scroll to it, and then we can click. Here I'm giving a slip of 1 second. This slip is not because of the test, I just wanted to give you 1 second to think and to see what happened between the two steps of the test. Now after we completed the test, we can try and run it. Okay, the 100 megabyte was downloaded, there was a 1 second wait, and then it scrolled down to the 1 gigabyte and clicked on this button as well. So for now we can see that our test did exactly what we expected from this test. Of course that we could have a better validation. This test, just for the simplicity of this example, I didn't use any validation. A good validation would be to check the download folder to see if a new file was added. We can also use the name of the file to see if this is the expected name that we had. We could wait for the download to complete. So we could have a lot of assertions in order to complete this test and make it like more testable. We have here just use actions and we click on buttons, but we don't know if those actions were successful. So just for the simplicity of this example, we won't do that. Okay, let's head to our fourth and final question. The title of this question is how to click on a non-interactable element. And what do we mean by that? When we try to click on an element, but we get an exception, such as the element is not interactable exception or element click intercepted exception. Why do we have this exception? Is because another element is blocking the way. What it can be, it might be an overlay, it might be another element that our element is not interactable yet. So you probably know that sometimes you have in a site a grayed out button for a few seconds, and then it becomes in a different color and you can click on it. The suggested solution that we'll discuss here is, first we'll write a method which will catch the exceptions, the two exceptions that we mentioned in the previous slide, and then we'll try to click on it until it succeeds. Of course, we'll include a timeout in case it won't succeed. Okay, here in this example, we have the overlay timer. In this case, we tried, you can see those elements are interactable, and if we'll set the timer, in this case it will be 8 seconds, you can see that I cannot click on anything else because there is an overlay now covering. After 8 seconds, or we can also reduce it to fewer seconds, all the elements become interactable. Of course, we could use the wait for element to vanish that we saw in previous examples, but for now we'll just look at another angle, another solution. Okay, let's build our test. Of course, we have this section which deals with the loader that we saw in previous tests. As I told before, we might use a fixture. Just for the simplicity of these examples, we'll use it as is. Okay, first we'll start by scrolling the page. I have a predefined method which called scroll page. If we can have a look, it just uses action chains. It holds the control and end key buttons and clicking on it. If you'll do it in your own keyboard, you could see that the page is scrolling down. Okay, after we'll scroll down, let's go back. Let's start and click on our logo element, which is the element that we wanted to click on after the overlay will vanish. Yes. Oh, I forgot to click on the overlay button before. So this test won't do anything. Let's start and identify the overlay. If we look on it and we'll inspect this element, we could see that the overlay timer has an ID which the ID is set overlay. We'll identify this button. Here I want to click in a different way. I want to click using JavaScript. This is another example of clicking on an element. We'll execute a script. It's called argument in the 0 point dot click, and then we'll supply the element that we want to click on. Yeah, now it should work. We'll scroll the page, we'll click on the overlay button, and then we'll try to click on the logo button. Let's execute this test. Okay, nothing happened. Okay, we have a fail. Yeah. What happened that the logo element, okay, if we look at the error, we could see that the element that we tried to click on throw an exception which called element click intercepted exception. This, the reason for that is because of the overlay. So what can we do? Instead of using the click method, we can use another predefined method that I've created before this meeting. It's called click until interactable, and we provide this method, the element that we want to click on. Now, the method is using a timeout. Of course, I could use the timeout, externalize it to the parameters of the method. Just for the simplicity, I just hard-coded, specify the 10 seconds of a timeout, max timeout. Here we can see that we catch both exceptions, the element not interactable exception and the element click intercepted exception. And we'll try to click on this element until either the timeout will pass or the element would be clickable. This method will return a Boolean value, and of course it will return the value if you weren't able to click until the timeout has passed, will return a false value. The counter, by the way, is for log usage. If you want to use in your log to see how many times we try to click on this element, maybe you want this number, so you could use the counter. Yes. And here we return the value of the element is interactable. Okay, let's continue our test. We can use the value returned from the click until interactable method and put it in a result Boolean value, Boolean variable, and we can specify the fail reason in case there was a fail. We'll assert it. Now we have a complete test. Let's try and run it. Okay, see that something happened here and we didn't click on the logo. Let's try and understand. Oh, what you can see here that I needed to scroll up in order to click on the logo. Since I didn't implement a method for scrolling up and it will take time from this lecture, so let's skip on it and we'll try to click on one of the buttons from previous tests, the 1 gigabyte or the 100 megabytes. Okay, so we'll switch the logo element with this download button large, and we'll click until interactable here. We'll just fix the error message and let's try to rerun it. Yes, you can see that this button was clicked, the test has passed. Of course, we could use the wait for element to vanish and to wait for this overlay to vanish. But here you could see that there was a different approach. Okay, let's discuss what have we seen here. The first problem that we encountered was the endless loading page. The solution that we had for this particular problem is to change the loading strategy of the page to be eager, and then we could use this web page while it was still interactive and not complete. The second problem that we saw is to wait for a fully loaded page, which there are some asynchronous elements that are still loading. We just waited for the loader to vanish. Another problem that we saw is the download bar was over an element. In order to overcome this problem, we used the actions chains. We moved this element, and that way we made sure that our element is presented on the screen. The last one that we just saw is to click on the non-interactable element. We implemented a method which we called click until interactable. What's next? You are all welcome to visit our YouTube channel. There you can find some lectures about Selenium, solutions for common problems, and overview the testing automation world. Here you have this address of our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Also, we're now developing a course which we call it HTML for Testers. This is an HTML course which will teach you the fundamentals of HTML, but from a testing point of view. For example, if you go to Stack Overflow and look at examples of problems that people use, you usually just see fractions of code. You will never get the full code there, because usually those people are working in a company. They can disclose all the details and they just want to solve a particular problem. Our research of hundreds of questions that we saw made us develop this website that you can see in the course, that you can use and study Selenium and then implement your knowledge in our website that you will learn how to build in this course. Also, you can find us in the social networks. You can find us on Facebook under RDG Software Solutions, or LinkedIn. You can see our company number is 33262961. Thank you for listening and have a great day.